Hello everyone, and thank you for clicking on this video. We're going to do kind of a two-subject thing. One is, as quickly as I can, do a review of the Sugess, I have no idea how it's pronounced, Top Chronometer, which is obviously their Daytona homage. And then part two is going to be, I guess, my homage philosophy. So, real quick out of the way, there's already a lot of videos about this watch. But one thing that I found maybe, I don't know if lacking is the right word, but the gap that I felt was there is that a lot of the channels that talk about Sugess or San Martin or Tactical Frog or some of these other well-known homage brands, the channels seem to focus almost entirely on $500 and under watches. And while I do value their opinion, what you might want to hear and what I really wanted to hear was the opinions of someone who also has spent a lot of time with more expensive watches. Because I mean, it's all well and good to say that, something is for $100, $200, $300, $400, $500 is very good. But if that's all you've handled, then, there's not really much to compare it to. So I own some higher end watches. I've handled, I've handled Rolexes and Omegas and, some more high end stuff on, my monthly kind of watch nerd friend dinners. There's a group of us that get together once a month and just nerd out. So yeah, that is where I feel like I might add something useful for you guys, for whoever's watching this. All right, so real quick, I really like this watch. I think I paid like $350 out the door for it. There was a 4th of July coupon. And they're doing something with the shipping that there were no tariffs or anything on this, July of 2025. So things that I don't like, so that we can end on a positive note as usual. With watches, I'm starting to feel like it's all about the details. When it comes to what is a nice watch or what is a quality watch, and things like sharp edges or just the small things that really give away the price of this watch. So because on the face of it, the polish is nice, the finish is the finish is very good. It's a really, and especially outside in the natural light, it's a really great looking watch, even regardless of them stealing the design 100% from a Daytona. I think it's just a good looking watch. The end. They did a really good job, but where it kind of shows its price are the little details. So the bracelet, I think, is one of the places where watches can really become hits or misses. On here, if you run your edge kind of at a 45 or degree angle, or just kind of along the edge of the bracelet here, you can feel that it's pretty sharp. And on the backside too, just going back and forth. Yeah, the bracelet feels pretty silky, and it does have a pretty solid sound. If you've ever handled a Citizen Soyosa bracelet, or like a Seiko 5 Jubilee, or even a vintage Rolex Jubilee or a vintage Rolex Oyster, that they're just kind of jangly messes. This this is really solid. But you do have some pretty sharp edges on the links. That's where things start to fall apart. And then another nitpick where you can start to see, where you start to notice, it becomes obvious, the price point becomes obvious, is the finishing on the case back. You see that these lugs are kind of just, I don't know, they're cut out. The cutout here is not super elegant. I don't know how to best to describe it other than that. And this edge along either side of the case is, again, pretty sharp. And then, I don't know, just the kind of how the lugs versus, the lugs dip in so much and then the case back sticks out. I don't know. I feel like there's some better implementations of that, and having that big, that almost W of the lugs and the case back is kind of, I don't know. It's not uncomfortable. It's just I feel like it's a finishing thing that could have, it's somewhere that some money was, not as much design might have been put into it. And then actually looking at kind of these lugs, how it kind of, I don't know, it kind of sticks out in a funny way versus some other watches, like take the Zodiac, for instance. And this bracelet wasn't even made for this watch. How it blends into the lug really nicely. What else was I thinking about? Then probably the last part where things get, you notice things are getting you notice the inexpensiveness, are working the threads. When you unscrew these caps, it is very obvious that this outer sleeve is very, very thin and very, very light, and there's just no weight or resistance to it at all. And I've never I don't know that I've played with the real thing that much, maybe once or twice, and I really can't quite remember how it felt. But these, when it kind of, with that, a little bit of, there is a pretty good amount of play there, you can see. It's just very obvious that these collars are very cheap. And then also the crown, when you unscrew the crown, it's very gritty. It's like an 80 grit sandpaper unscrewing that crown. Winding it up is fine. And then, like, because of that grittiness, it's hard to feel where the threads catch. There they are. And it's very gritty winding it back up. Again, compared to other watches I've had. Even I don't remember how the San Martin felt, but like I had a Glycine Combat Sub, which is a marvel in itself of how good that watch is for how cheap it is, or how inexpensive it is, I should say. But the crown, for instance, the crown on the Glycine Combat Sub was exquisite. Let's see here. And then this is more of a philosophical thing, I guess, with regards to this watch specifically. I'm not going to be testing the limits of this watch. I bought it for its looks and its value, not its durability. Things like warranty and water resistance didn't really come into play when I was looking at and ultimately decided to buy this watch. I know for a fact that I'm rolling the dice on the warranty and the reliability and the serviceability. And that's not that I don't care about those things. It's just not really something like, when I'm looking at a watch from basically a Chinese only brand, I'm not, my expectations for warranty, for servicing, for reliability, for durability, for the water resistance, the real water resistance to match the product description, I don't really care. I don't know how else to say it. It's just not something I really care about. I'm not particularly worried about the watch. $380 is a meaningful amount of money, and it's not money that I can afford to just throw away. But so in that sense, I'm going to be somewhat judicious about how and when I wear this watch. I did wear it golfing. I wasn't particularly worried about it then, but just in general, I don't have the same confidence as I do of Seiko for $380. I have a lot more faith in the $380 Seiko or Hamilton. But you know, whatever the customer service process is with this, I really hope I don't have to deal with it. Not because I've heard it's bad or I actually think it's bad. It's really just speculation. The selling point for this watch, of course, is that it looks great, is the way it looks, and you're getting a very wearable mechanical chronograph for under $400. And when I look at this watch, I don't think about Rolex. All I think is that this is a really handsome watch of decent quality. You know, my wrist is like 6.5, maybe 6.6 inches, and it's I think the sizing is just perfect. And if you've been looking at watches for any period of time, you'll know that a mechanical chronograph under 13 or 14 millimeters is pretty darn hard to come by. I think the Hamilton Intramatic with the 2 subdials, that's like 14 and a half millimeters. A lot of mechanical chronographs that are brand new for under $5,000 are pretty darn thick. Even the Tudor, I think it's the Black Bay Chrono, is pretty darn thick. The marvel of the Daytona, I think, is how thin they are. I don't know. I don't remember the specifications exactly. I'm sure the real Daytona is thinner than this. But I think it's somewhere between 12 and 13 millimeters. This thing rules. And then, so now some positive points. On your wrist, looking at it, wearing it, all of that negative stuff I just talked about, you don't notice. You don't feel the sharpness of the bracelet. You don't, unless you're working the chronograph, you don't feel the cheapness of the threads. You just see you just see this awesome contrast between the polishing and the brushing and these classic proportions and a really, whether or not this is ceramic, I have no idea. Probably not. I don't really care. It's just a really good looking watch, mechanical watch, for less than the price of a Seiko speed timer. And I think that's a home run. Some other things. So real quick negative, the clasp, and this is a super nitpick. The whatever the heck you call this securing fold over device. You can see there's a little play in it. The fit, the fit isn't great on this. And when it's unfolded, I don't know, there's not a lot of weight to it. It does feel kind of cheap. Does the Rolex have more weight to it? I have no idea. I can't remember. The clasp itself is awesome. There's the rest of the class. There's also almost no play. Everything feels thick and sturdy. You've got a little extension here. I forget what what Rolex calls it, Easy Link or whatever. That functions really nicely. You have this really nice, really well polished. All aspects of this clasp. I think that's the clasp and the watch head are the biggest home runs on this watch. It fits, it feels really secure, and of course it looks great. It does scratch a little easily. Day one, I don't know how I got that mark on it, but it is what it is. Such is life. That's part of watch ownership. So yeah, if you like the Daytona, if you like how it looks, if you like this watch, if you can get it for under $400, I'd say go for it. I'm trying to remember what the Seiko speed timer felt like in hand. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I do remember other, Seiko, like Seiko 5s, sub $500 Seikos. I remember not really liking the bracelets. And I think the clasps on Seiko, on the speed timer and the Seiko 5s might be stamped. Whether or not this is stamped or milled, I'm, not, I don't have the palette to tell, but it looks and feels a lot sturdier and nicer than a stamped clasp. Pardon me, I need a drink of water. Now, some bracelet comparisons I brought out here. These are unfair comparisons because these are all much more expensive watches. But for instance, some things like this Zodiac Jubilee, I think these are like 200, 250 retail. It's got maybe just ever so slight, the edges could be a little bit more dulled. But it is really nice. It is really nice. It's got that kind of silky, solid feel. It's really hard to describe, but go get hands on a Seamaster Professional 3-link bracelet, or any of the Omega 3-link bracelets are exceptional. A bracelet, an more expensive bracelet that was a little underwhelming is like the Bremont, for example. You can kind of, I don't know if it comes across on camera, but it kind of has that slightly flimsier, chintzier feel. If you've ever handled a Marathon bracelet or even a San Martin bracelet, honestly, this kind of feels somewhere in between the San Martin and the Marathon bracelet. And this is definitely a milled clasp, but I don't know, somehow this doesn't have quite the same sound and feel as these links do. And then we have the Grand Seiko bracelets, which there are no sharp edges whatsoever. They're very silky, very solid. People often complain about the Grand Seiko bracelets, especially the older ones, but I don't really have any complaints about them. This one could be a little bit better, but again, it does no sharp edges, very solid feeling. It's got a little bit of a stretch, but it does have that kind of like a soft talking, like a muted, soft clocking sound. I don't know what the adjectives are. Anyway, but yeah, to me, bracelets, I'm very critical of bracelets because I've, too many times the quality of the bracelet does not seem to match the price tag and quality of the watch head. I'm looking at you, Marathon GSAR, and older Bremont a little bit. All right, we're 18 minutes in. I'm going to try and blow through my, this part 2 here, and get the information out. So part 2, buying Homage watches. In my 8 years as a watch enthusiast, I've owned 3 Homage pieces. June 2017, the very first watch I ever bought with my own money was an Invicta 17044. The second Homage I bought was a San Martin Black Bay 58 GMT Homage, and then I did not secure that very well. And then the third one being, of course, the Top Chronometer, the Daytona Homage. By now, I feel I have developed a philosophy of Homage buying that some others might like to hear. And I'm sure some of these elements you've heard elsewhere because, that's just the nature of watches. Some ideas, we watch content, we pick up on other ideas, agree with them, disagree with some of them. So here we go. To start, I'll try and remember why I bought each of the Homage watches. The Invicta was literally the first piece I bought with my own money. And let's get one thing out of the way right now. Even back in 2017, I thought the Invicta original designs were rather hideous. But the 17044 was a perfectly good watch for $82. I bought it knowing full well it was an Homage piece, and because it was an Homage piece, I was new to watches. I, didn't really know what I liked, but I was drawn to the Submariner design. But obviously I couldn't afford it. I was working as a sales associate at a music store, and owning a Submariner seemed even less likely than getting to marry Jennifer Lawrence. The gentleman who has sparked my interest in watches was a guitar teacher at the store, and I think one of the first watches he showed me was his Speedmaster Professional, or maybe I noticed it, or I can't remember the conversation exactly, and I wish I could remember our conversations in more detail. I do remember that when I came to work with my Invicta, he was interested, encouraging, and did not utter any put-downs. After a couple of years, I was able to buy some nicer pieces, still sub $500, and I ultimately left the Invicta on a break room table at work with a sign that said free. At the time, I was working at a place where over 100 people were at that location, so I I figured somebody would want it. The watch was worth so little that it really wasn't worth trying to sell. Fast forward to the summer of 2024, the most expensive watch at the time I had at that time was the Marathon G-SAR, and an attainable grail was the Tudor Black Bay GMT. The Rolex Pepsi had long been in my heart, and when the Tudor came out, I was ecstatic. But $4,000 to $5,000 was still pretty out of reach. And so when I learned about San Martin, I think I was specifically looking for an homage of the Tudor because I was daydreaming about the Tudor, and it seemed so out of reach. When I bought the San Martin, I was blown away by it. The quality, the price, how closely it and how nicely it resembled the real thing. And it did fool one passerby at the airport, and I had to awkwardly say no, it's not a Tudor, because he said nice Tudor. I only kept that San Martin for about 6 months, and by the end of 2024, I had felt I had too much cheap stuff. I'd been fortunate enough during 2024, fortunate or irresponsible enough to acquire 2 Grand Seikos, the bracelets, bracelets we see here, and you can watch my other videos about them. So yeah, and in the second half of 2024, and so that's when I purged a lot of my sub $1,000 watches. Now we're in the summer of 2025. My collection has come a long way since 2017, now boasting, of course, Christopher Ward, Bremont, Grand Seiko, Zodiac, and I'm starting to feel that watches in the $4,000 to $10,000 range are in the realm of possibility. Mostly because my job has, gone in a pretty good upward trajectory since then. The price range at which I laugh or relegate to retirement age or winning the lottery has bumped up to $15,000+. And even at that, even in that, like, say, $15,000 to $50,000, there are watches I feel that I'm more likely to own than others. And one of those that I feel that I'm less likely to own is the Daytona. So let me backtrack a tiny bit. I found an Omega 2254 on eBay. It was kind of beat up, no boxer papers. The seller did not title or describe the watch very well, so it didn't come up in my standard array of search terms. All of this meant that I thought the watch would go cheap. Considering what others were asking for Seamaster Professionals and how much a Mint 2252 was worth, I set my max bid at 30 seconds before the end of the auction, and 10 seconds left, I was outbid by $25. Ugh. On the one hand, I was satisfied about not going over budget, because in order to win the auction, I likely would have had to go $50 or $100 over budget. At the same time, I was so sure that I was going to get that watch that losing the auction made me very itchy to buy something in the subsequent weeks. My first thought was the Omega Speedmaster Reduced, a great watch at a similar price to the 2254, and it filled a legitimate gap in my collection as I did not own a chronograph. But with a wedding to pay for and a fiance to answer to, I thought it best to not spend $2,500 on a watch that would probably be upgraded at some point to a nicer chronograph. The 2254 would have been a forever piece. It's a serious grail of mine. The Speedmaster Reduced, I really like, but it's not something that I dream of owning. So now we're back to thinking about, okay, what can I get? If I want to get a watch, what is there like for under $500? I'd seen vintage versions of the Glashütte CQ for around $500, but none of them were on sale at the time. Enter the Homage watch. I was just about to pull the trigger on a C-Stern CQ Homage when it occurred to me that almost all of my watches are dive watches, and buying another dive watch was kind of silly. I didn't really need a sport watch because of my colorful Zodiac being super sporty, and then of course my Christopher Ward Dartmouth, which is technically a dive watch, but it's just so thin, and I don't know, for some reason to me this feels more sporty than divey. So with those, so no sport, no dress, no dive, leads back to chronograph. My favorite chronograph under $500 being the Seiko Speed Timer Panda. While looking at the C-Stern website after ruling out the CQ, I found their Daytona homages. I was also kind of considering the Cookie Monster homage, but three things made me rule that out. One, the Cookie Monster is slightly more attainable than the Daytona. Not price-wise, just availability-wise and depreciation-wise. Two, I didn't need another dive watch. And three, the C-Stern Cookie Monster homage has the word seaman or seaman written on the dial. And once I saw that, I was kind of grossed out and I could not unsee it. All right, so back to the Daytona homages. I was between the White Panda and then the Blue-Brown Platinum. My fiance did not offer any preference between the two, so it was all up to me. What it came down to was the fact that the price so high and production probably so low on the real platinum Daytona that wearing an homage of that felt kind of like cheating, or well, even more like cheating than wearing this thing. Also, if a passerby watch enthusiast saw the platinum homage, their excitement would go from 100 to 0, like the 2008 stock market, once they realized the reality of what I was wearing and not wearing. But most importantly, the blue-brown color scheme would likely be hard to coordinate with my outfits, and it was generally a little too flashy for my taste. Now that that story is over, leading up to here, this watch, what is my watch homage philosophy? A big part of it lies with the reason I did not buy a Rolex Pepsi GMT homage. The price, the 16,700 Pepsi is more than likely out of my reach, but I love it and I am determined to own it at a young enough age where I can wear it throughout most of my upcoming milestones. And I did not want to cheapen the experience of owning and wearing the real thing by buying a knockoff now. A Daytona, on the other hand, is a watch that I really like, but it's not necessarily a hard, fast goal of mine to own one. It doesn't keep me up at night, partly because they're so hard to get from the dealer that that as the aspect is very discouraging. The secondary values, even in the summer of 2025, are still pretty darn high, at least on the steel models. So generally speaking, the steel Daytona is not a watch I realistically expect to own. Maybe as a retirement gift, but even at that time, I might go for a precious metal version rather than a steel. So buying and wearing a Panda steel homage right now kind of feels okay. Excuse me. I've got a couple of hard fast points here to list out. My homage criteria. 1. Is the real thing a watch I want to own? Yes. The Daytona is something I would like to own. But for example, Rolex Datejust. I don't really want a Datejust, so I'm not going to buy a Datejust Homage. Then, for example, the Platinum Daytona. Even if I had the money, I'm not sure I would buy the Platinum Daytona because it's so flashy. And the color scheme is so wild, especially for my wardrobe. I don't know if that would really fit. So I'm not going to get the Platinum Daytona Homage. Number 2, is the real thing a watch I can afford to buy in the next 30 years? The answer should be, in order to buy the Homage, the answer should be no. For example, I might be able to afford a Submariner. I might be able to afford a Speedmaster, or a Seamaster Professional, or a Grand Seiko Snowflake. Therefore, I'm not going to buy those homages because they are, they're relatively attainable. All right, so number 3, is owning this watch in the next 30 years a legitimate goal of mine? And this kind of ties into, number 1 and 2. So like the Pepsi GMT, a white gold or yellow gold Daytona, a Patek Philippe. Those are, in varying degrees of severity, those are goals of mine that I really would like to own. So I'm not going to buy those homages. Setting aside the homage aspect, does the watch in question fill a gap in my or your collection? Or is there overlap? Ideally, there should not be overlap. Because to me, so like if you're, well, all right, so I'll come back to that and collect my thoughts. So like the Cookie Monster, the Glashütte CQ, Rolex President, those are watches in some form or another I kind of already own. I have, it's not shown here, but I have a very dressy, small Grand Seiko. I have more than enough divers. So I'm not gonna buy an homage of a watch that has overlap with watches I already own. I've already got some very nice divers and a very nice dress watch. So why am I gonna buy an homage of another dress watch or another dive watch when I already have really nice when I already own really nice original designs of a dress watch, of a dive watch, of a GMT, that kind of thing. All right, number 5. Will people immediately know it's a fake? I think the answer should be no, for my personal taste. Take the Platinum Daytona Homage. That would likely conjure more immediate doubt than the steel, because the Platinum Daytona, new from Rolex, is like $80,000. On the secondary market, it's like 150. That's, I don't know. I feel like if I saw one of those in the wild, I'd be like, I don't know, is that real? Whereas if I saw a steel, something like this, I would be less likely to doubt it upon first glance. Number 6, on its own merits, is the homage a quality piece? No matter what amount, if you're spending $5 or $50,000, if the watch does not feel like a quality item, then you shouldn't buy it. Because you're not going to enjoy it. Yeah, this obviously has some shortcomings, but overall, it feels like a good watch. It's very accurate, and it looks great. Dunzo. All right, number 7. How faithful is it to the original? For instance, we've already talked about this a little bit. The idea of wearing a steel homage or an homage of a precious metal watch that's made out of steel feels a bit try-hard. Take the Cookie Monster, take the Platinum, or a Patek homage. To have a steel watch that is trying to look like a white gold watch or a gold watch or a platinum watch. It's, I don't know, that's a bit try hard to me. You know, if it's, I'd much rather just, because you know, that's, you know, maybe it comes down to like, I'm gonna look at the watch and think, oh, the real thing is white gold. This is, and then this is, and that's going to kind of cheapen the experience of owning the watch I have. Whereas this is steel. The watch it's imitating is also steel. So I feel okay about that. In the case of the Daytona, the other very popular homage is the Pagani design. What I did not like about the Pagani design, oh, I think we'll try and zoom in here a little bit. Oh, where'd we go? What I didn't really like about the Pagani is the font was very different from Rolex, from the Rolex font, and the, Pagani had their own little badge at the top, which to me is kind of a dead giveaway that it's an homage and a strong departure from the original design. On this watch, the lack of an actual logo and the font itself really lends to its kind of going under the radar and not necessarily tricking people, because that's not what I'm not trying to trick people. But I also don't want to walk around with something that is glaringly obviously a copy. You know, I feel like there's a fine line in between there. And then furthermore, yeah, the Pagani is a lot less expensive because it's quartz. So yeah, and that kind of goes back to the precious metal thing. Like if the real thing is mechanical, I'd like for the homage to be mechanical. All right. And that's really all I had to say about everything. I hope you found this video helpful and informative, or you know, maybe gave you a little bit different perspective, reinforced your perspective. Yeah, one way or another, I hope you got something out of this. This is a long video. These usually go longer than I intend. And if you're with me at the end, thank you very much for sticking with my ramblings. And have fun on your watch collecting journey. If you think this is for you, you know, or if you want a chronograph, I can wholeheartedly recommend this. It's a great looking watch for not a lot of money. You can get a display case back. You know, these are pretty solid. Homage watches can be cool. All right, take care, everyone.